Hashtag the man behind the livestock barn. This happened when I was 19, during the summer after my first year of college. I grew up in a small town where the county fair was one of the only things people actually looked forward to every year. It was one of those fairs that had everything packed into one giant muddy field. Carnival rides, food trucks, livestock barns, tractor pulls, local bands, 4-H displays, demolition derbies, and those sketchy games where nobody ever seemed to win the big stuffed animals hanging from the ceiling. When I was younger, the fair felt almost magical. The lights, the music, the smell of fried dough and funnel cake, the sound of kids screaming on rides, and the dust kicked up from the gravel paths, all made it feel like the entire county had come alive for 1 week. But by the time I was 19, I mostly went because my friends still went. That year I went with my best friend Tyler and his girlfriend Emily. The plan was simple. We were going to walk around, get food, maybe ride a few rides, watch the fireworks at the end of the night, and head home. Nothing complicated. The fairgrounds were about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by cornfields and back roads. Parking was always a nightmare, so we got there around 6 in the evening before the main crowd arrived. Even then, the gravel lot was already filling up with trucks, minivans, and old cars with county plates. The sun was still out when we walked through the main gate. Everything looked normal. Families were lined up for wristbands. Kids were dragging their parents toward the rides, and older people sat under tents, listening to a country band warming up near the main stage. Tyler immediately wanted food, so we stopped at a stand selling cheesesteaks and lemonade. Emily wanted to look at the animals afterward, because she had grown up around horses and always liked walking through the barns. I didn't really care where we went. I just remember feeling relaxed. It was one of those warm summer evenings where nothing feels urgent. We walked through the goat barn first, then the sheep barn, then the cattle barn. It smelled exactly how you'd expect. Hay, dirt, animals, and that heavy, humid barn smell that sticks to your clothes. There were families brushing cows, little kids asleep in folding chairs beside their animals, and older men talking near fans attached to the walls. At the far end of the cattle barn, there was a narrow path that led toward the older livestock buildings behind the fairgrounds. Those buildings weren't used much anymore. They were darker, quieter, and farther from the midway. Most people stayed near the food, rides, and main barns. As we were leaving the cattle barn, I noticed a man standing near the exit. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He was wearing jeans, dirty work boots, a faded green shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. Nothing about him looked unusual for a county fair. But he was not looking at the animals. He was looking at people. More specifically, he seemed to be watching families as they walked past. I noticed him because he wasn't moving. He just stood near the shadowy part of the barn entrance, holding a plastic cup in one hand, scanning the crowd in this slow, deliberate way. I didn't say anything about it. At a fair, you see plenty of random people standing around. We left the barn and headed back toward the midway. For the next couple of hours, everything was completely normal. We ate, played a few games, and watched Emily somehow win a small stuffed bear by throwing rings onto glass bottles. Tyler complained that the game was rigged because he lost $10 in 5 minutes. Around 9, the fair was packed. The sky had gone fully dark, and the rides looked brighter against it. You could hear generators humming behind the food stands, music coming from different directions, and constant announcements over the speakers that were impossible to understand. Emily wanted to ride the Ferris wheel, so we got in line. While we were waiting, I looked across the walkway and saw the same man from the cattle barn. He was standing near a popcorn stand. Again, he was not buying anything. He was just watching the crowd. This time I pointed him out to Tyler. I said, "That guy was near the barns earlier." Tyler glanced over and said, "Which guy?" I nodded toward him, but by then a group of people walked between us. When they passed, the man was moving away. Tyler shrugged and said, "It's a county fair. You're gonna see the same people twice." He wasn't wrong. I let it go. After the Ferris wheel, Emily said she wanted to use the bathroom before the fireworks started. The bathrooms near the rides had a huge line, so she said she remembered seeing portable toilets near the livestock barns with barely anyone around. Tyler offered to walk with her, and I went too because we were all heading that direction anyway. The path back toward the barns was much quieter than the midway. You could still hear the rides and music behind us, but it faded the farther we walked. The lighting was worse back there too. There were floodlights attached to some of the barns, but a few of them flickered or didn't work at all. Emily went to the portable toilets, while Tyler and I waited near a fence. That was when I saw the man again. He was standing near one of the older livestock buildings, partly hidden by the corner of the structure. The building behind him had peeling white paint and a sign that said it was for storage only. There were no animals inside, no families around it, and no reason for anyone to be standing there. This time, I knew he was looking at us, or at least it felt that way. Tyler noticed my expression and followed my eyes. He said, "Is that the same guy?" I said, "Yeah." Tyler didn't joke this time. Emily came back a minute later, and we started walking toward the main fairgrounds again. We got back to the crowded area right before the fireworks. Everyone was moving toward the open field behind the main stage, where they had a better view of the sky. We found a spot near the edge of the crowd, close enough to see, but far enough that we could leave quickly afterward. The fireworks started around 10. For a while, I forgot about the man. The display was loud enough that you could feel it in your chest. Kids were covering their ears, people were filming on their phones, and smoke drifted over the fairgrounds with every explosion. It should have felt safe. There were hundreds of people around us. But halfway through the fireworks, Emily leaned close to me and Tyler and said, "Don't turn around fast, but I think that guy is behind us." I felt my stomach drop. I turned slowly, pretending to look around at the crowd. About 30 feet behind us, standing near a row of parked golf carts used by fair staff, was the man in the baseball cap. He was watching us. There were other people around, but he wasn't looking at the fireworks. His face was turned in our direction, lit up every few seconds by red and white flashes in the sky. Tyler muttered, "Okay, that's weird." Emily said she wanted to leave. Tyler said we should wait until the fireworks ended, because trying to push through the crowd in the dark would be worse. I didn't like that idea, but I understood what he meant. The crowd was packed, shoulder to shoulder. For the rest of the show, none of us watched the fireworks. We kept glancing back. That didn't make me feel better. When the finale ended, everyone started moving at once. It was chaotic. Parents were calling for their kids, people were folding chairs, and the midway lights became visible again through the smoke. We headed straight toward the parking lot. The problem was that the fairgrounds had multiple exits, and the path to our car took us past the livestock area again. There were still people around, but not nearly as many as before. Most were heading the same direction, but the farther we got from the rides, the more spread out everyone became. Tyler kept looking over his shoulder. Emily walked between us. About halfway to the parking lot, Tyler said, "Don't stop walking." I said, "What?" "He's behind us." I looked back. The man was maybe 40 yards behind us, walking at the same pace. At that point, there was no more convincing ourselves it was coincidence. We sped up. So did he. We reached the gravel lot, but it was a mess. Cars were trying to leave from every direction. Headlights were blinding us, and people were cutting between rows looking for their vehicles. Tyler had parked near the far edge of the lot, by a line of trees and an equipment shed. That felt like a terrible place to be heading now. I told Tyler we should go back toward the fair staff or find a police officer. County fairs usually had deputies around for traffic. Tyler agreed, but before we could turn around, Emily grabbed my arm and whispered, "He's closer." The man was now at the entrance of the parking lot, moving between cars. And he was no longer pretending not to follow us. Tyler pulled out his phone and said he was calling 911. He didn't even wait to see what the man did next. While he was talking to the dispatcher, the man changed direction and moved behind a row of trucks, disappearing from view. That was somehow worse. Out in the open, at least we could see him. We kept walking toward a bright area near the ticket booths. Tyler told the dispatcher there was a man following us through the fairgrounds and parking lot, and that we were trying to find an officer. The dispatcher told us to stay in a populated area. We reached a small security booth near the gate, where two older fair workers were talking. Tyler told them what was happening. One of them immediately waved over a sheriff's deputy who was directing traffic nearby. We explained everything as clearly as we could. The man at the barns, the popcorn stand, the fireworks, and the parking lot. The deputy asked for a description. As I was giving it, Emily suddenly pointed toward the livestock barns. The man was standing near the corner of one of the buildings again. This time, the deputy saw him too. He told us to stay there and started walking toward him. The man turned and walked behind the building. The deputy radioed for another officer and followed. For several minutes, we just stood near the booth, listening to distant engines, fair music, and people leaving. It felt surreal. Everyone around us was still having a normal night, while we stood there waiting to find out if some stranger had been following us for hours. Then we heard shouting from behind the livestock barns. Another deputy sprinted across the gravel. A few minutes later, both deputies came back with the man in handcuffs. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't drunk or confused. He just looked irritated, like he had been inconvenienced. One of the deputies asked if we could identify him from a distance. We all said yes. But the part that still makes me feel sick happened after that. When they searched him, they found a folding knife, zip ties, a small flashlight, and a set of keys that did not belong to any vehicle registered to him. They also found a piece of paper in his pocket. On it were descriptions of several people from the fair. Not names, just descriptions. A woman in a red hoodie with 2 kids, a teenage girl with a blue backpack, a boy in a baseball jersey, and then one that said, "Girl with 2 guys, brown hair, white shirt, leaves with them." That was Emily. The deputy separated us from the crowd and took formal statements. They asked Emily if the man had approached her earlier in the night. She said no. She had never spoken to him. Later, we found out more. The man's name was Carl Mercer. He was not from our town. He had a record in another county involving stalking, trespassing, and attempted abduction. He had been released from jail less than a year before. Police believed he had been visiting crowded public events like fairs and festivals because they gave him a way to watch people without standing out. He had parked in a field access road behind the old livestock buildings, not in the main lot. That explained why he kept drifting back toward that area. Deputies found his vehicle there after they arrested him. Inside the vehicle, they found more zip ties, duct tape, gloves, and several printed flyers from county fairs and local festivals in the surrounding area. Some were circled with dates and times. The keys in his pocket turned out to belong to a maintenance gate behind the barns. Investigators never told us exactly how he got them, but one theory was that he stole them from a fair worker earlier in the week. The scariest part was what the deputy told Tyler's parents later that night. He said we did the right thing by not going to the far edge of the parking lot alone, because based on where Mercer's vehicle was parked and the direction he was trying to lead himself back toward, there was a good chance he was waiting for us to get isolated near the livestock buildings or the darker edge of the lot. He wasn't just randomly following us. He had a plan. Mercer ended up being charged with several offenses, including stalking, possession of unlawful restraint tools, trespassing in a restricted fairground area, and violating terms connected to his prior conviction. The knife and zip ties made everything much more serious. He eventually took a plea deal and went back to prison. I know compared to other stories, nothing physically happened to us. He never grabbed Emily. He never pulled the knife. He never got us alone. But that's exactly what makes it stay with me. Because the whole night we were surrounded by people, families, fair workers, kids, deputies, lights, music, food stands, all the things that make you feel like nothing bad can happen. And still, he was there the entire time, watching, waiting, moving whenever we moved. The fair came back the next year, like it always did. Tyler and Emily went one night with a bigger group. I didn't go. I told them I was busy, but really, I couldn't stop thinking about those old livestock barns and the dark stretch of gravel near the parking lot. I still go to fairs sometimes now, but I don't wander into quiet areas after dark. I don't ignore the same face showing up too many times. And when I see someone standing alone near the edge of a crowd, not watching the event, but watching the people, I pay attention. Because that night taught me something I wish I didn't know. Sometimes the scariest person at the fair isn't hiding in the dark. Sometimes he's standing right there under the lights, holding a drink, waiting for everyone else to look away. The last ride of the night. This happened when I was 17, the summer before my senior year of high school. Every August, my town had a county fair that lasted for 5 nights. It wasn't massive or famous or anything like that, but for the people who lived nearby, it was one of the biggest things of the year. Everyone went at least once. You'd see people from school, teachers, families from church, kids you hadn't talked to since middle school, and random people from surrounding towns who only seemed to appear when the fair came around. That year, I went on the last night with my cousin Ryan and my friend Devin. The last night was always the busiest because the rides stayed open later. A local band played near the main tent, and most of the food vendors discounted stuff they didn't want to pack up. It was also the night when people got a little more careless. Parents were tired, teenagers wandered off in groups, workers looked exhausted, and the whole fair had this worn-out feeling beneath the lights and music. We got there around 7, right as the sun was going down. The fairground sat behind an old high school, in a big open field bordered by trees on one side and a gravel parking lot on the other. From the parking lot, you could see the Ferris wheel above everything else, turning slowly against the orange sky. The rest of the rides flashed and spun below it, surrounded by food stands, game booths, livestock tents, and old metal barriers that made temporary walkways. At first, nothing about the night felt weird. We got wristbands, ate fries from one of those paper trays, and walked around looking for people we knew. Ryan was the loud one. He had that kind of confidence where he could talk to anyone, even people he barely knew. Devin was quieter, and mostly there because we talked him into coming. I was somewhere in the middle. We rode a few smaller rides first, then played games. Ryan spent $15 trying to win a basketball shooting game and walked away with nothing. Devin won a tiny stuffed frog from one of those water gun racing games and kept pretending it was the best prize at the fair. By 9, the fair was packed. The air smelled like fried food, hay, diesel from the generators, and smoke from the grill stands. The ground was dusty from hundreds of people walking the same paths all night. Every few seconds, someone would scream from one of the rides, and then another ride operator would yell something through a microphone that came out distorted through the speakers. We eventually made our way toward the far end of the midway, where some of the bigger rides were set up. That was where we first noticed the ride called the Cyclone. It was one of those spinning rides where the cars were attached to long arms that lifted and rotated while the whole platform spun. I had seen similar ones before, but this one looked older than the rest of the rides. The paint was chipped in places, and the lights around the sign flickered unevenly. It made a loud metallic clanking sound every time the ride slowed down. Ryan immediately wanted to go on it. Devin said no, because he had just eaten a funnel cake and didn't want to throw up. I wasn't excited about it either, but Ryan kept pushing. He said it was the last night of the fair, and we were being boring. While we were standing near the entrance, I noticed the ride operator. He was a tall, thin man with a gray beard and a sunken-looking face. He wore a faded black hoodie, even though it was still warm out, and a dirty orange safety vest over it. His hair stuck out from under a cap with no logo on it. He didn't really look at the people getting on the ride the way the other operators did. Most of them shouted instructions, checked bars, joked with kids, or looked bored while doing the same routine over and over. This guy barely spoke. He just stood by the control panel, chewing on something, staring at people as they handed over tickets or showed their wristbands. When Ryan walked up, the man looked him up and down and said, "3?" Ryan said, "2." He's scared. He pointed at Devin. The man didn't laugh. He looked at me, then at Devin, then back at Ryan. Then he said, "Last night, might as well ride." His voice was low and raspy. I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable, but not scared. Fair workers are always kind of strange. They travel from town to town, work long hours and deal with annoying kids all day. I figured he was just tired. Ryan and I got in line. Devin stayed outside the gate and said he'd record us. The line moved slowly because the operator seemed to take forever checking the restraints. When it was our turn, Ryan and I got into a car near the back. The seats were cracked and smelled like old metal and sweat. The lap bar came down with a clunk. and the operator walked by, tugging each bar once. When he got to ours, he leaned closer than he needed to. He looked at Ryan and said, "You boys from around here?" Ryan said, "Yeah." The man asked, "You drive yourselves?" That was a weird question. Ryan, being Ryan, said, "Yeah, why?" The man smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said, "Just wondering." Then he moved on. The ride started a minute later. It spun fast enough that I forgot about the question almost immediately. Ryan was yelling and laughing the whole time, and Devin stood outside the fence filming us. The ride lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt longer because of the spinning and the lights. When it finally slowed down, I felt dizzy and relieved. As we got off, the operator was standing by the exit gate. He was watching Ryan again. Not me, not Devin. Ryan. I noticed it because Ryan didn't notice it. We walked away from the cyclone and found Devin near a lemonade stand. He showed us the video, laughing at how stupid we looked. Ryan wanted to ride something else, but I needed a minute, so we sat at a picnic table near the edge of the midway. That was when things started to feel off. Ryan checked his pockets and said, "Where's my keys?" He had driven us there in his mom's car, and he was always messing with people. But after a few seconds, his face changed. He stood up and started patting every pocket. Wallet, phone, wristband, loose cash, no keys. He checked the table, the ground around us, then the bag of food wrappers we had carried. Nothing. I asked when he last had them. He said he definitely had them when we parked because he locked the car. After that, he didn't remember touching them. Devin said maybe they fell out on the cyclone. That made sense. The ride spun us around, and Ryan's shorts had shallow pockets. We walked back to the ride. The line was shorter now because it was getting later. The operator was leaning against the control booth, staring off toward the crowd. Ryan went up to him and said, "Hey, I think I lost my car keys on the ride." The man looked at him for a second. Then he said, "What kind?" Ryan said, "Toyota key fob, black. There's a house key on it too." The man nodded slowly and said, "Haven't seen it." Ryan asked if he could check the car we were sitting in. The man said, "Ride's still running." Ryan said, "Can you check after?" The man looked toward the exit, then back at Ryan. He said, "Come back before close." That bothered me. It wasn't what he said exactly, it was how he said it. Like he wanted us to come back later, when fewer people were around. Ryan, of course, didn't think much of it. We retraced our steps for almost half an hour. We checked the picnic table, the food stands, the bathroom area, and the games we had played. We asked 2 different fair workers if anyone had turned in keys. Nobody had. The longer we looked, the more stressed Ryan got. His mom was strict about the car, and losing the keys at a county fair was exactly the kind of thing she'd never let him forget. By 10:30, the crowd had thinned out a little. Families with younger kids were leaving. Some vendors were closing. The lights were still bright, and music still played, but the energy had shifted. It felt less like a celebration, and more like everyone was slowly packing up. Ryan said we should go back to the cyclone. I didn't want to. I told him we should go to the main office or find security first. He said, "Dude, I'm just going to ask if he found them." So we went back. The cyclone was still running, but there were only a few people in line. The operator saw us coming before we even reached the gate. That alone creeped me out. He stepped out of the booth and said, "Looking for these?" He held up Ryan's keys. Ryan looked relieved and said, "Yes. Where were they?" The man didn't answer right away. He turned the keys over in his hand like he was inspecting them. Then he said, "Found them under one of the cars." Ryan held out his hand. The man didn't give them back. He said, "Need you to come around the back and sign for them." Ryan frowned. "Sign for them?" The man nodded toward the area behind the ride. Lost property. There was a fenced-off service area with cables, generator boxes, crates, and metal panels stacked near the back of the ride. Beyond that was the tree line at the edge of the fairgrounds. It was much darker back there, mostly lit by the flashing ride lights. I said, "Can't you just give them to him?" The operator looked at me for the first time in a while. He said, "Rules." Devin immediately said, "That's stupid, let's get security." The man's face hardened slightly, then he smiled again and said, "Suit yourself." He held the keys up and added, "They'll be at the trailer." Ryan asked, "What trailer?" The operator pointed behind the ride, toward a row of small white trailers parked beyond the service area. I hadn't noticed them earlier. They looked like worker trailers or storage trailers used by the carnival crew. He said, "Office trailer, behind the rides." Ryan started walking toward the side gate. I grabbed his arm and said, "No, we're not going back there." Ryan pulled away. "He has my keys." Devin said, "Then we'll get a cop." That finally seemed to convince Ryan. We walked away from the Cyclone toward the main ticket booth. I looked back once and saw the operator still standing there holding the keys. He was not watching the ride. He was watching us. We found a sheriff's deputy near the front gate. He was talking to a fair worker and helping direct people out of the parking lot. Ryan explained that the ride operator had found his keys, but wanted him to go behind the ride to sign something before getting them back. The deputy looked confused and said, "They don't do that." That sentence made all three of us go quiet. He asked which ride. Ryan pointed toward the Cyclone. The deputy spoke into his radio and started walking with us. By the time we got back, the ride had stopped. The lights were still flashing, but nobody was in line. The operator was gone. The deputy called out for him, then walked around the side of the fence. Another fair worker came over from a nearby ride and asked what was going on. The deputy asked who was operating the Cyclone. The worker said, "I thought it was Dale." The deputy asked where Dale was. The worker looked at the control booth, then around the ride. "I don't know," he said. "He was here a few minutes ago." The deputy asked if Dale had turned in keys. The worker said lost items were supposed to go to the fair office by the entrance, not behind the rides, and definitely not to any trailer. Ryan looked like he was going to be sick. The deputy radioed again and told someone to check the employee trailer area. We stayed near the ride while more officers and fair staff started moving around. A few minutes later, one of the deputies came back, holding Ryan's keys in a plastic glove. He had found them on the ground, behind one of the trailers, not in a lost and found box, not on a desk, on the ground. The officer asked Ryan to confirm they were his, then gave them back after taking photos. That should have been the end of it. While fair staff were searching for the operator, they discovered something behind the same trailer. A backpack. Inside were several wallets, phones, wristbands, and sets of keys. Some had names on keychains, some didn't. There was also a roll of duct tape, latex gloves, a small flashlight, and a folded piece of paper with descriptions of people from the fair. One description matched Ryan almost exactly. Tall blonde kid, Toyota keys, blue shirt, with two friends. The deputy immediately separated us and took full statements. They shut down the Cyclone for the night and started reviewing security footage from nearby booths. The fair didn't have great camera coverage, but one camera near a food stand caught the operator bending down near the exit of the ride, right after Ryan got off. Another camera showed him walking behind the ride later with something in his hand, Ryan's keys. That meant they had not simply fallen under the ride and been found later. The operator had picked them up almost immediately and kept them. Police found him about 40 minutes later, trying to leave through a service road behind the fairgrounds. He had changed out of the orange vest and was walking toward a pickup truck parked behind the carnival trailers. His real name was Dale Harkins. We found out later that he had only been hired temporarily by the ride company a few weeks earlier. He was not supposed to be working alone that night, but another operator had gotten sick, and because it was the final night, everyone was stretched thin. Dale had a criminal history, mostly theft and burglary, but there were also prior complaints involving harassment and suspicious behavior around teenagers at fairs in other counties. Nothing had stuck enough to keep him from getting temporary work. The more police investigated, the worse it got. They believed Dale had been stealing keys and phones from people on rides throughout the week, then using the excuse of lost property to lure them behind the ride area or toward the trailers. In most cases, people probably brought a parent, friend, or worker with them, so nothing happened beyond theft. But on the last night, with the fair shutting down and the area clearing out, he may have been waiting for someone young and separated from the crowd. Ryan fit that. 3 teenage guys walking around alone, one of them missing car keys, embarrassed and desperate to get them back. The deputy told us later that if Ryan had gone behind the ride by himself, even for a minute, Dale would have had every advantage. It was dark, loud, and blocked from public view by the ride equipment and trailers. People would have assumed he was a worker dealing with a lost item. Dale was charged with theft, attempted unlawful restraint, possession of criminal tools, and several other offenses connected to stolen property found in his backpack. After investigators tied him to incidents from earlier that week and possibly other fairs. He ended up taking a plea deal and went to prison. I wish I could say the story stopped affecting us after that. Ryan blamed himself for almost walking back there. Devin kept saying he should have pushed harder to get security right away. I kept thinking about how ordinary Dale looked. He wasn't hiding in a mask. He wasn't lurking in the woods. He was standing in front of hundreds of people, operating a ride, wearing a safety vest, acting like someone who had authority. That was the worst part. At a fair, you automatically trust the workers more than random strangers. They control the rides. They open gates. They tell you when to sit, when to stand, when to wait, and where to go. You don't question them the way you would question someone else. Dale knew that. He knew that if he held up a set of keys and said, "Come with me," most people would follow. The next year, I went back to the county fair for about 20 minutes. I tried to enjoy it. I really did. But every ride operator suddenly looked suspicious. Every worker trailer behind the rides made me uneasy. Every dark gap between booths felt like somewhere a person could disappear for just long enough that nobody would notice. I left before it got dark. Ryan still goes sometimes, but he keeps his keys clipped to his belt now. Devin refuses to ride anything that requires emptying his pockets. As for me, I haven't gone on a carnival ride since. Not because I'm afraid of the rides breaking. I'm afraid of the people standing beside them. Because one night, under all those lights and music, a man running a ride almost convinced my best friend to follow him into the dark over a set of car keys. And if we hadn't stopped him, I don't know if Ryan would have come back out. The girl at the funhouse exit. This happened when I was 21, during the first weekend of our county fair. At the time, I was home from college for the summer and working part-time at a hardware store. My friend group had mostly scattered after high school, but every year when the fair came around, a few of us still made plans to go. It was less about the fair itself and more about the tradition. We had gone as kids, then teenagers, and now as young adults who pretended we were too old to care, but still ended up buying greasy food and walking around for hours. That year I went with my friends Matt and Serena. We got there around 7:30 on a Friday night. It had rained earlier in the day, so the field was damp and the gravel paths had muddy spots where people had dragged their shoes through puddles. The air smelled like wet grass, fried onions, diesel from the generators, and the sweet chemical smell of cotton candy. The fairgrounds were busier than I expected. There were families everywhere, teenagers walking in packs, older couples sitting on benches, and little kids running around with light-up toys. The rides were set up in a big oval around the midway, with food stands in the center and game booths along the outside. Past the rides were the animal barns, and past those was the dirt arena where they did truck pulls and rodeos. We walked around, got food, and ran into a few people we knew from high school. Matt wanted to ride almost everything, but Serena got motion sick easily, so we mostly stayed near the games and food stands. I remember standing near a basketball booth while Matt lost 3 times in a row, convinced the rim was bent. Serena and I laughed at him until he finally gave up. Around 9, we reached the older section of the fair where the smaller rides were set up. There was a kiddie coaster, a tilt-a-whirl, a spinning apple ride, and an old funhouse that looked like it had been traveling since the 1980s. The funhouse was called the Mirror Maze, even though it was more than just mirrors. The outside had faded paintings of clowns, distorted faces, and cartoon ghosts. The lights around the sign blinked unevenly, and there was a mechanical clown near the entrance that laughed every 30 seconds in a broken, scratchy voice. Serena immediately said no. Matt immediately said yes. I didn't really care either way, but Matt kept pushing, saying it would be funny and that we could film ourselves getting scared by stupid jump scares. Serena said she would wait outside by the exit, so Matt and I bought tickets and went in. The inside of the funhouse was exactly what you'd expect. Narrow hallways, warped mirrors, spinning floors, air blasts from hidden vents, and cheap props that popped out with loud noises. It smelled like old carpet and warm plastic. The whole thing shook slightly every time someone moved through it. Matt was laughing the entire time, making exaggerated, scared noises whenever something jumped out. I was mostly just trying not to trip because the floor kept shifting beneath us. About halfway through, we reached the Mirror Maze section. It was darker than the rest of the funhouse, lit by blue and red bulbs that made every reflection look strange. The mirrors were smudged with fingerprints, and some of them were scratched so badly they distorted everything. You could hear other people laughing somewhere ahead of us, but sound bounced around so much that it was hard to tell where anyone actually was. At one point, Matt walked ahead of me and turned a corner. I followed him, but for a few seconds I lost sight of him in the reflections. That was when I saw a girl standing in one of the mirror corridors. She looked younger than us, maybe around 14 or 15. She had long brown hair and was wearing a yellow hoodie. She was standing completely still, not laughing, not walking, not looking around like someone enjoying the maze. She looked scared. At first I thought she was part of another group and had gotten separated. I called out, "You good?" She turned toward me. Before she could answer, Matt popped out from around a corner and yelled, which made me jump. I looked away for maybe 1 second. When I looked back, the girl was gone. I told Matt what I saw. He said she probably kept walking. We made our way through the rest of the funhouse and came out through the exit ramp, where Serena was waiting. She was scrolling on her phone, looking bored. The first thing she said was, "Did you guys see that girl?" I asked, "What girl?" She nodded toward the exit. "Yellow hoodie. She came out like 2 minutes before you." She looked really upset. I looked around the area. There were people everywhere, but I didn't see her. Serena said the girl had come out of the funhouse alone and immediately looked behind her like she expected someone to follow. Then she walked toward the side of the ride, near where the workers kept storage boxes and extra cables. That bothered me. I asked if she was with anyone. Serena said she didn't think so. Matt said maybe she got scared and went to find her parents. That was possible, but something about her expression stuck with me. The fair was loud and crowded and chaotic, and kids got separated all the time. But she didn't look like a kid searching for family. She looked like someone trying to get away. We stood there for another minute. I kept looking near the funhouse, expecting to see her again. Instead, I noticed a man standing near the exit. He was maybe in his 30s, wearing a black baseball cap and a gray zip-up hoodie. He had one hand in his pocket and was pretending to look at the ride, but his eyes kept moving toward the side area, where Serena said the girl had gone. Again, nothing about him was obviously threatening. He could have been a dad waiting for his kid. He could have been a worker on break. He could have been anyone. But then he walked toward the side of the funhouse. Not casually, directly. I told Matt and Serena, "I'm gonna check something." Matt asked what I meant, but I was already walking. The side of the funhouse was darker than the front. The music and laughter from the midway were still close, but the sound changed once you stepped behind the row of game booths. There were extension cords running across the ground, a few metal barricades, stacked prize boxes, and a narrow service path between the back of the funhouse and a line of trailers. I didn't see the girl at first. Then I heard a voice, a man's voice. It was low and angry, but I couldn't make out the words. I moved closer, staying near the corner of the funhouse. That was when I saw the girl in the yellow hoodie standing near a generator box. The man in the gray hoodie was in front of her, blocking her way back toward the midway. He was leaning down slightly, talking to her in a sharp whisper. She was shaking her head. I couldn't hear much, but I heard him say, "You're embarrassing me." That one sentence changed the whole situation in my head. This wasn't a random stranger checking on a lost kid. This was something else. I stepped out and said, "Hey, is everything okay?" The man turned fast. The girl looked at me, and I remember the look on her face clearly. It was relief mixed with fear, like she wanted help, but was afraid to ask for it. The man forced a smile and said, "We're fine." I looked at the girl and asked, "Do you need help finding somebody?" The man answered before she could, "She's my niece." The girl immediately said, "No, I'm not." For a second, nobody moved. Then the man's face changed. The smile disappeared completely. He grabbed her wrist and said, "Stop lying." I yelled for Matt. The man pulled the girl toward the trailers. I ran after them, but he shoved the girl behind him and put his hand into his hoodie pocket. I stopped because I didn't know if he had a knife or something worse. By then, Matt and Serena had come around the corner, followed by a fair worker who must have heard the yelling. The fair worker shouted, "Hey, what's going on back here?" The man let go of the girl. She immediately ran toward Serena. The man backed up, looking from me to Matt to the worker. Then he turned and ran behind a funhouse. The fair worker grabbed a radio and called security. Matt chased him for a few steps, but I yelled at him to stop because we had no idea what the guy might do. Serena had the girl with her. The girl was crying now, but trying not to make too much noise. She kept saying, "He's not my uncle. I don't know him." She was 15, and she had come to the fair with 2 friends from school. According to her, she got separated from them near the funhouse entrance. While she was inside the mirror maze, the man approached her and said her friends were waiting for her near the exit. She thought he might be a worker at first, because he seemed to know where the exit was and acted confident. But when she got out, he led her away from the crowd instead of toward her friends. That was when she realized something was wrong. She tried to walk back, but he told her to stop making a scene. He claimed he knew her parents and that they were angry she had wandered off. When she said she didn't know him, he got more aggressive. If Serena hadn't noticed Chloe come out alone, and if I hadn't seen the man follow her, I don't know what would have happened. Security arrived within a couple of minutes, followed by 2 sheriff's deputies who were stationed near the fair entrance. Chloe gave them a description, while Serena helped her call her mom. The fairgrounds were put on alert quietly. They didn't shut everything down, but workers near the exits were told to watch for the man. Deputies started checking the area behind the rides and trailers. For about 20 minutes, they couldn't find him. Chloe's mother arrived, crying and furious. She hugged Chloe so tightly, I thought she might not let go. One of Chloe's friends showed up too, saying they had been looking for her and thought she had gone to the bathroom. It was chaotic and emotional, but also strange because only a few yards away, the fair kept going like nothing had happened. Kids were still laughing, rides were still spinning, people were still eating funnel cake. That contrast made everything feel more disturbing. Eventually, a deputy came back and asked Chloe if she could identify the man from a distance. They had detained someone near the worker parking area behind the fairgrounds. We all stayed back near a security golf cart while they brought him into view. It was the same man in the gray hoodie. Chloe immediately started crying again and said, "That's him." His name was Aaron Lasky. He was 34 years old and not from our county. He had no family at the fair, no children with him, and no reason to be near the funhouse exit. When police searched him, they found 2 prepaid phones, a small folding knife, and a wristband that had been cut and taped back together so he could remove it and re-enter without paying. They also found a folded map of the fairgrounds in his pocket with several areas circled in pen. One of the circled areas was behind the funhouse. Another was a darker service path near the livestock barns. A third was a gap in the fencing near the worker parking lot. Later, police found out that Lasky had been hanging around fairs and town festivals in multiple counties. There had been reports of him approaching teenage girls, asking if they needed help finding friends, claiming to know their parents, or pretending to be a family member when confronted. He had been arrested before for harassment and trespassing, but that night was the first time police had enough witness statements and security footage to charge him with attempted abduction. The funhouse had a camera near the exit. The footage showed Chloe coming out alone, looking back nervously. It showed Lasky stepping into frame a few seconds later, approaching her, then guiding her away from the public area. It also showed me following a short time later. That footage became important later. Lasky tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. He said Chloe looked lost, and he was trying to help. But the video, the witnesses, the map, and Chloe's statement made that story fall apart quickly. He eventually took a plea deal and went to prison. Chloe was physically okay, but I later heard from someone who knew her family that she had a hard time afterward. She stopped going to public events for a while. Her parents became extremely protective. I can't blame them. As for me, I thought about that night for a long time. Not because I did anything heroic. I didn't fight him. I didn't tackle him. I didn't even fully understand what was happening at first. I just noticed something that felt wrong and decided not to ignore it. That is the part that still sticks with me. County fairs are designed to overwhelm you. Lights flash everywhere, music plays from every direction, people shout, laugh, scream, and move in crowds. You stop noticing individual faces because there are too many of them. Someone like Lasky counted on that. He didn't need to drag anyone away in front of a crowd. He just needed to sound confident for 30 seconds. He needed one young person to be separated from her friends. He needed one dark service path behind a ride where the music was just loud enough to cover a raised voice. After that night, I stopped seeing fairs the same way. I still go sometimes, but I notice the spaces behind the lights now. The gaps between rides, the trailer areas, the The quiet paths near the fences, the places people walk past without really looking. And whenever I see a kid or teenager standing alone near an exit, looking confused or scared, I pay attention. Because Chloe was surrounded by hundreds of people that night. But for a few minutes behind that funhouse, she might as well have been alone. The prize booth. This happened when I was 22, during the last weekend of the county fair in my hometown. I had been going to that fair since I was a kid. It was the kind of place where nothing really changed from year to year. The same food stands were always in the same spots. The same old men sat near the tractor display. The same families brought their kids to ride the same rides their older siblings had grown out of years before. Even after I got older, I still went because it felt familiar. That year I went with my younger sister Katie and her friend Brooke. Katie was 17 at the time and Brooke was the same age. My parents asked me to drive them because neither of them wanted to deal with the fair traffic, and I didn't really mind. I figured I would walk around, eat something unhealthy, maybe run into a few people I knew, and leave once they were ready. We got there around 6:30 in the evening. The parking field was already almost full. Cars were lined up between temporary orange cones, and volunteers in reflective vests waved people into crooked rows in the grass. The sun was still up, but it was low enough to shine directly into everyone's eyes. Dust floated over the parking area every time a truck drove past. Katie and Brooke were excited the second we got out of the car. They had that kind of energy where they wanted to do everything at once. Food first, then games, then rides, then back to food, then pictures under the lights once it got dark. I told them I was not babysitting them every second, but they had to stay together and keep their phones on. Katie rolled her eyes and said she knew. At first, the night was completely normal. We walked through the front gate and into the main fairgrounds. The rides were ahead of us, flashing in every color. The Ferris wheel was turning slowly above everything. The food stands were already crowded, and you could hear that constant mix of carnival music, generators, kids screaming on rides, and game workers yelling for people to try their luck. Katie and Brooke wanted lemonade, so we stopped near a food truck. After that, they dragged me toward the game booths. Most of the booths were exactly what you'd expect. Ring toss, basketball, balloon darts, water guns, and those impossible bottle games where the prizes hanging overhead always looked better than anything anyone actually won. But near the far end of the midway, there was one prize booth I didn't remember seeing before. It was a long booth with black curtains along the back wall and rows of stuffed animals hanging from hooks. The prizes were better than usual. Big bears, oversized dogs, cartoon characters, and a few creepy-looking clowns with painted smiles. The sign above the booth said, "Win big every time." That alone should have told us something was off. The man running the booth was probably in his 40s. He had slicked back hair, a thin mustache, and a red button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He smiled constantly, but it felt less friendly the longer you looked at him. He called out to Katie and Brooke as we passed. 2 chances for 5, he said. Everybody leaves with something. Katie stopped immediately. I said, "Don't waste your money." She ignored me and walked up to the counter with Brooke. The game was simple. You had to throw 3 softballs at a stack of metal cans. Knock all the cans down, win a big prize. Knock down some, win something smaller. Katie played first and barely knocked 2 cans over. The man laughed and gave her a small plastic bracelet as a consolation prize. Brooke played next. She actually knocked all the cans down. The man's smile disappeared for maybe half a second before it came back. "Well, look at that," he said. "Winner." Brooke looked shocked. Katie started cheering. I expected him to hand over one of the big stuffed animals right there, but instead, he leaned on the counter and said, "Big prizes are kept in the back. Too many people try to grab them if I hang them out front." That sounded weird. He pointed toward the black curtain at the back of the booth. "Pick whatever you want from the prize room." Brooke looked at Katie, excited but unsure. I immediately said, "She can pick from here." The man turned his attention to me. His smile got tighter. He said, "Rules are rules. Big winners pick from the back." I said, "Then bring one out." For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he laughed like I was being difficult in a funny way. "No problem," he said. "Which one?" Brooke pointed to a giant white bear hanging near the corner. The man reached up, but then acted like he couldn't get it down. He tugged at it once, shook his head and said, "That one's tied from behind. She'll have to come point to it." I said, "No, she won't." The mood shifted after that. Katie whispered, "Can we just go?" Brooke looked embarrassed, like she had caused a problem by winning. The man leaned closer over the counter and said, "You don't want your prize?" Brooke said quietly, "It's fine." He stared at her for a few seconds, then slowly took one of the smaller stuffed animals from the front and tossed it onto the counter. "Suit yourself," he said. We walked away. Katie called him creepy once we were far enough that he couldn't hear us. Brooke laughed nervously and said she felt bad for making it awkward. I told her she didn't do anything wrong. The guy was weird. For the next couple of hours, we forgot about it. We got food, walked through the animal barns, and watched some of the demolition derby from behind the fence. Katie and Brooke went on a few rides while I stood nearby and checked my phone. The fair got more crowded as it got dark. By 9, it was packed enough that walking anywhere meant squeezing between groups of people. At around 9:30, Katie said she and Brooke wanted to go back to the games one more time before we left. I said fine, but after that we were heading home. We made our way back toward the midway. The prize booth was still open, but the man in the red shirt was not behind the counter anymore. A different worker, a younger guy with glasses, was running it. Katie wanted to avoid it, but Brooke suddenly stopped. She looked around and said, "Where's my bear?" The small stuffed bear she had won earlier was gone. She had been carrying it most of the night, but none of us remembered when she last had it. It might have fallen near the derby fence or at one of the food tables. Brooke said it wasn't a big deal, but Katie insisted we look for it because Brooke had actually won it. We retraced our steps for a while. We checked the benches near the food stands, the fence by the arena, and the area near the rides. Nothing. Eventually Brooke said, "Forget it. It was tiny anyway." That should have been the end of it, but as we were walking toward the exit, Katie got a text. She looked down at her phone, frowned, and stopped walking. I asked what was wrong. She turned the screen toward me. It was from an unknown number. The message said, "Your friend left her prize." Attached was a blurry photo of Brooke's small stuffed bear sitting on a wooden table. For a second, none of us said anything. Brooke asked, "Who is that?" Katie said, "I don't know." I asked if she had given her number to anyone at the fair. She said no. Then another message came in, "Come to the booth before close." I asked Katie if the booth worker had touched her phone earlier. She said no. Then Brooke quietly said that when she won the game, the man in the red shirt had asked if she wanted a picture with the prize. Brooke said no, but Katie had set her phone down on the counter for a second while digging money out of her bag. It must have been then. The man had either seen her number on the lock screen, taken a picture of it, or somehow used the emergency contact screen. I don't know exactly how, but he had her number. I told Katie to block it. Before she could, another text appeared. "Don't make your brother mad. I only want to give the prize back." That was the first message that truly scared me. He knew I was her brother. That meant he had been watching us long enough to figure that out. I told the girls we were not going back to the booth. We were going straight to security. Katie looked like she wanted to cry. Brooke kept apologizing even though none of it was her fault. We found a fair security worker near the exit gate. He was an older guy in a yellow shirt with a radio clipped to his belt. I explained what happened and showed him the texts. The second he saw them, his expression changed. He asked which booth. I pointed down the midway. He radioed someone and told us to wait near the game. A few minutes later, a sheriff's deputy walked over. We explained everything again. He asked Katie for the unknown number and looked at the messages himself. While he was asking questions, Katie's phone buzzed again. The new message said, "You went to security?" My mouth went dry. The deputy saw it too. He looked up immediately and scanned the crowd. Another message came in. That was stupid. The deputy told us to stay with the security worker and not move. Then he spoke into his radio and headed toward the game booths with another officer. We stood there, near the exit, surrounded by people leaving the fair. Everyone else looked tired and happy, carrying leftover food and stuffed animals. It felt insane that something serious could be happening in the middle of all that. For about 10 minutes we heard nothing. Then the deputy came back. He said the red-shirted worker was gone. The younger worker at the booth told them the man's name was Vince, and that he had left suddenly about 15 minutes earlier, saying he was going to the storage trailers behind the midway. The younger worker didn't know his last name. He said Vince had only been working there for the week, and mostly kept to himself. The deputy asked if we had a clear description. We did. At that point, the fair security team quietly started checking the exits in the worker areas. The deputy asked Katie if she had received any more messages. She checked. There was one, it said, "Last chance." Attached was another photo. This one was not just a stuffed bear. It was a picture of the three of us standing near the security gate, taken from somewhere behind us. Katie started shaking. The deputy immediately moved us inside a small office trailer near the front gate. He told us to stay there with another officer while they searched. From inside the trailer, we could still hear the fair outside. The muffled music, the ride slowing down, people laughing as they left. It felt strangely distant, like we had stepped behind the curtain of the whole place, and were now seeing the part nobody was supposed to notice. Katie's phone buzzed one more time. The message said, "I can wait by your car." I told the officer. He asked where we were parked. I told him the general area of the parking field. Officers went out there immediately. That was where they found him. Vince was crouched between two cars, 3 rows away from mine. He had Brooke's stuffed bear in one hand and Katie's phone number written on a torn piece of cardboard in his pocket. When officers approached, he tried to walk away like he was just another fair worker heading home. But he still had the red shirt on under a dark jacket. They detained him near the parking lot before he got close to our car. When they searched him, they found more than just the bear. He had 3 different phones, none of which were registered in his name. He had a roll of duct tape, zip ties, a pocket knife, and several handwritten notes with descriptions of girls from the fair. One note described Katie and Brooke, 2 girls with older brother, one bear, blue shorts, brown hair. Another note had a partial description of my car, including the color and the first few letters of the license plate. That meant he had followed us to the parking lot at some point earlier in the night. Police later searched the storage area behind the prize booth. Behind the black curtain was not some normal prize room like he had claimed. It led into a narrow walkway behind multiple booths, then toward a row of storage trailers and supply tents. It was dark back there, crowded with boxes, cables, and equipment, and almost completely hidden from the main midway. If Brooke had followed him behind the booth to pick a prize, no one standing out front would have seen where she went after the curtain closed. That thought still bothers me. Vince's real name was Vincent Mallory. He was 39 years old and had been traveling with a small subcontracted carnival game company. He had a criminal record in another state, including harassment and unlawful imprisonment, but he had used a slightly different name when getting hired for seasonal fair work. The police believed he was using the prize booth to identify teenage girls, create reasons for them to come behind the counter, and then isolate them away from the crowd. The lost prize messages were probably another tactic. If someone left something behind, he could lure them back later when the fair was closing and the crowd had thinned out. Because we went to security instead of responding, he moved to the parking lot. That part makes me angrier than anything. He wasn't just being creepy, he was adapting. He saw the first plan fail, so he tried another one. Vincent was charged with stalking, harassment, attempted luring, possession of restraint tools, and other offenses connected to the notes and messages. Once investigators looked into him further, they connected him to complaints from other fairs in nearby counties, where girls reported being pressured to go behind booths to claim prizes. He eventually took a plea deal and went to prison. Katie and Brooke were physically okay, but the whole thing affected them badly. Brooke blamed herself for winning the game, which made no sense, but fear does that to people. Katie stopped wanting to go anywhere crowded for a while. My parents were furious that someone like him had been hired at the fair in the first place. As for me, I kept thinking about the black curtain behind the booth. When you're walking through a fair, you only see the front of everything. The lights, the prizes, the workers smiling, the games designed to pull you closer. You don't think about what's behind the curtain. You don't think about the trailers, the dark paths, the storage areas, or the fact that some people working there might know exactly how to disappear into those spaces. I still go to fairs sometimes, but I don't let anyone in my family follow a worker anywhere alone. I don't care if it's for a prize, a lost phone, or a refund. If something needs to be picked up, we get security or another worker first. Because that night taught me that sometimes a prize is not really a prize. And sometimes the person smiling behind the booth is just waiting for the moment when the lights, the noise, and the crowd make you forget how dangerous one small step behind a curtain can be.